On a blizzard night in Montana, a broke cowboy found a pregnant mare dying in the snow. He thought he was saving a life, but he was really walking into a buried secret deep in the mountains, where mercy, freedom, and fate would be tested by storm, blood, and the untamed faith of a wild horse that refused to kneel. The wind came like a scream across the valley, cutting through the fences of Sage Bluff as if the earth itself had split open. The snow wasn't falling anymore. It was flying, a blinding wall of white that swallowed fences, trails, and even the horizon. Noah Briggs leaned low in the saddle, his coat stiff with frost, his scarf pulled high across his face. Every breath stung. Every step of his old bay gelding sounded like it might be the last. He had been riding since dusk, leaving the flickering lights of the town far behind. There had been no work again that day. The rancher at the rail yard had turned him away with a sympathetic shrug. "Try next week," the man had said. Noah knew that meant don't bother. His pockets were empty except for a piece of jerky and a flint match. The storm had caught him halfway home, turning the mountain road into a frozen river of wind. He tugged the brim of his hat lower, the leather stiff from years of sun and dust. "Easy, boy," he muttered to his horse, though his own voice sounded thin, swallowed by the gale. The gelding's ears flicked back, nervous. The wind roared through the canyon like a living thing, and Noah thought, not for the first time, that Montana winters had a cruel way of reminding a man how small he truly was. Then came a sound, so faint he thought at first it was the wind changing pitch. A whimper, thin and broken. He halted. For a moment, there was only the groan of ice in the trees. Then it came again, low and pained, not the cry of timber or storm. An animal, a horse. Noah swung down from the saddle, boots sinking to his ankles in snow. "Whoa now," he told his mount, tying the reins to a bent pine. The wind tugged at his coat, slapping it against his legs as he cupped his hands around his mouth. "Easy, girl. Where are you?" The world was nothing but white and shadow, the sound of the storm roaring in his ears. Then, as the wind shifted, he saw it. A dark hump at the base of a drift, half buried beneath snow and branches. He stumbled closer, fighting the cold that gnawed at his bones. The shape moved weakly. It was a horse, a mare. Her coat once chestnut, but now dull and crusted with ice. Her eyes flicked open as he approached, wide, liquid, filled with exhaustion and a quiet, burning will. Noah froze. Wild mustangs were not known to let men close, but this one didn't try to rise or kick. She just looked at him, her breath fogging the air like smoke from a dying fire. Around her neck was a length of rope, frayed and chewed halfway through, as if she'd broken free from something, or someone. "Easy now," Noah whispered, crouching beside her. The rope burned his fingers with cold as he tugged at the knot. "You're all right. I'm not going to hurt you." She trembled, muscles twitching under his touch, but didn't fight. Beneath the frost, her belly swelled, heavy with foal. He glanced around the storm, half expecting to see riders, hunters, anyone, searching. Nothing but snow and wind. "Who did this to you?" he murmured, though his words were lost to the storm. He pulled off his heavy coat and spread it across her flank. The cold bit instantly into his shirt, but he ignored it, brushing snow from her muzzle. "Come on, girl. Not tonight. Not like this." He dug with his bare hands, scraping at the drift that pinned her legs. His fingers burned, then went numb. The mare groaned, tried to move, and sank again. Noah braced his shoulder against her side and pushed. "One more," he gasped. "Come on, girl. Just one more." With a groan like the cracking of ice, she lurched free, collapsing onto firmer ground. Noah nearly fell with her, chest heaving, lungs stabbing with cold. For a moment, they both just lay there, the man and the animal, two silhouettes against the endless white. When he finally stood, the wind had eased a little, though snow still drifted sideways in thick curtains. He looped the rope gently around her neck. "You're coming with me," he said. His voice was hoarse but steady. The mare's ears flicked toward him. Then she pushed herself up, trembling but standing. Step by step, they moved through the storm. The gelding followed behind, his head low, his tail whipped by wind. Noah led them down the ridge, every step a battle against the snow that grabbed at their boots and hooves. It took nearly an hour to reach the edge of his land, a sagging shack with a lean-to barn, both half buried in snow. The roof groaned under the weight, the lantern at the door long since burned out. He led the mare into the barn, cleared a space in the straw, and tied her loosely to a post. She sank down almost immediately, sides heaving. Noah threw down the last of his hay, then knelt beside her. "You've been through hell," he whispered. Her eyes half closed, lashes rimmed with frost. "You made it here. That's what matters." He built a small fire in the brazier, feeding it with splinters from a broken crate. The light pushed back the shadows, flickering across the mare's face. For the first time, Noah saw the marks clearly: the rope burn, the branded scar along her neck, the old, half-healed wound on her leg. This was no accident. Someone had tried to break her. He sat there for a long time, listening to the storm batter the roof. The fire hissed. The mare's breathing steadied. Slowly, he reached out and touched her mane. "You made it through the storm," he said softly. "You'll carry the name Storm Grace." Her ear twitched at the sound, as if accepting it. Outside, the wind howled again, but inside the little barn, something warm had begun to take root, a flicker of defiance, faint but alive. Noah leaned back against the stall post, his hands raw and bleeding, his eyes heavy. He hadn't meant to find her tonight. He'd only meant to survive the storm. But as he watched the mare breathe, he understood that maybe she'd found him instead. He closed his eyes, listening to her slow, even breaths, and for the first time in years, he felt the world grow quiet. The storm's howl softened into a distant murmur beyond the barn walls, and the flicker of firelight painted warm strokes across the mare's face. The name he'd given her, Storm Grace, felt right. It was as if the two words held the story of both their lives, battered by weather, but still standing. When dawn finally came, it crept through the cracks in the boards like shy fingers of gold. The light revealed what the night had hidden: ice crystals clinging to the rafters, his tools half buried in straw, and the thin line of his own footprints leading back out into the snow. The air inside was bitter cold, but smelled faintly of hay, leather, and life. Grace stirred, shifting her weight. Her breath made small clouds in the air. Noah pushed himself up from the corner where he'd slept, sitting against the wall, bones aching. "Morning, girl," he said softly, voice hoarse. He crouched beside her, checking the leg wound again. The bleeding had stopped, but the skin around it was swollen, angry. The rope burns on her neck were darker now, raw against her dun-colored coat. "Whoever did this to you," he muttered, "didn't want you getting far." She blinked slowly, her gaze steady, unafraid. That look did something to him. It reminded him of himself, the same stubborn will to keep breathing when the world didn't seem to care whether he did or not. He poured water from a bucket into a dented pan, letting her drink. When she finished, he rubbed her neck gently. "We'll get you fixed up," he said. "Somehow." The somehow hung heavy in the air. Noah had no money, no medicine, and barely enough feed for his old gelding, much less a wounded mare. But leaving her wasn't an option. By mid-morning, The wind had eased into silence. The snow outside sparkled beneath a pale sun, untouched except for the faint trails of rabbits and the crooked path he'd made the night before. He stepped outside, pulling his coat tighter around him. The world looked bleached clean, as if the storm had scoured away everything ugly. But in the quiet, he felt the loneliness return, a silence too deep for comfort. He needed help. Down the slope, about 2 miles east, smoke rose from the chimney of a small cabin. He knew the place. Dr. Lila Hart, the new veterinarian, lived there. She was young, sharp-tongued, and too kind for her own good. She'd patched his horse last summer when a fence nail tore its flank, refusing payment when he couldn't afford it. Noah hesitated. Asking her again felt wrong, but Grace didn't have time for pride. He saddled the gelding, left the mare resting, and started toward the Hart homestead. The ride was short but cold enough to freeze tears. The sky was brittle blue, the air full of light that offered no warmth. When he reached the cabin, he dismounted and knocked on the door. It opened a crack and Lila's face appeared, hair tied back, eyes tired but alert. "Noah Briggs," she said, recognizing him instantly. "You look half frozen." "Could say the same for what I found," he answered. "Got a mare up by my place. Hurt bad. Looks like she stepped in a trap. She's heavy with foal." Her expression changed, concern sharpening into focus. She grabbed her coat and a small satchel before he finished speaking. "Show me." They rode back through the thawing light. The trail was slick in places, the trees heavy with snow that dropped in sudden flurries when the wind stirred. By the time they reached the shack, the sun was dipping toward the hills again, turning the world the color of brass. Lila dismounted, pushing through the barn door before Noah could even offer a hand. The warmth from the brazier hit her face and she froze for a moment, staring at the mare lying in the straw. "Lord," she breathed. "She's been through hell." Grace's eyes flicked open, watching the newcomer with weary calm. Lila knelt beside her, fingers gentle but sure as she examined the injured leg. "This wasn't just a fall," she said quietly. "Look at the edges of the wound. That's from steel, one of those wolf traps, maybe larger. Someone set it for horses." Noah frowned. "Who in their right mind?" Lila cut him off. "You'd be surprised how many wrong minds live out here." She reached into her satchel, pulling out a jar of salve and a strip of linen. The smell of camphor filled the air as she dabbed the ointment on the wound. Grace flinched, but didn't fight. "She's strong," Lila said. "If infection doesn't set in, she'll make it. But this leg'll take time." Noah nodded, relief and worry mixing in his chest. "I can keep her here as long as she needs." Lila looked around the barn, the sagging roof, the cracked water bucket, the thin layer of hay barely covering the floor. "You'll need more feed and clean water, and don't let her lie on that leg too long." She stood, brushing off her hands. "I'll bring some supplies tomorrow." As she turned to leave, her eyes caught something near the stall post, a frayed rope with a piece of leather still attached. She lifted it, squinting at the half-burned mark pressed into it. "Crowell mine como, soon," she read aloud. Noah froze. "You sure?" "I've seen it before," Lila said grimly. "Silas Crowell's men use this kind of rope on their freight wagons. Why would they have a horse trap up here?" The question hung between them like fog. Outside, the wind picked up again, carrying with it the faint sound of distant hooves, or maybe just the echo of the storm returning. Lila set the rope down carefully. "Whatever this is, Noah, it's not just bad luck. Someone wanted this mare caught. And if she got away," she looked him straight in the eye, "they'll come looking." Noah felt the chill run deeper than the cold. Grace shifted, behind them, breathing slow but steady. He looked at her and saw not just a wounded animal, but the start of something much bigger, something he didn't yet understand. Lila pulled her gloves on. "I'll be back before night tomorrow. Don't go riding off anywhere." "I'm not going anywhere," he said quietly. When she left, dusk had already swallowed the hills. Noah closed the barn door tight, fed another handful of wood into the fire, and sat down beside Grace. She lowered her head toward him, her breath warm against his sleeve. "You hear that, girl?" he whispered. "Seems like you brought more than snow down from those mountains." Her ear twitched, and for a second, Noah thought he saw something flicker in her eyes. Not fear, not pain, but understanding. Outside, the wind rose again, brushing snow from the eaves like ash from an old fire. Inside the little shack, man and horse shared the same breath, the same silence. And somewhere in that quiet, a heartbeat, hers, his, or maybe both, kept the dark from winning. When dawn broke again, the world had turned brittle white and still. The storm had emptied itself through the night, leaving behind a sky scraped clean and sharp as glass. Noah stepped out of the barn, boots crunching on the crusted snow, the air so cold it bit through his beard. The valley stretched before him, silent, endless, and full of secrets. He rubbed his hands, scanning the tree line out of habit. A faint line marred the perfect surface of the snow, a disturbance half buried under fresh powder. He crouched, brushing it with his glove. It wasn't an animal track. The shape was too narrow, too deliberate. Wagon ruts, faint but real, cutting through the drift and leading north toward the ridge. His stomach tightened. No wagon had business up there in that kind of weather. And near the rut, a darker stain caught the light. He pressed his glove to it, lifted it close. Blood, already frozen stiff. "Someone came back," he muttered. The thought hit like a hammer. Whoever had trapped the mare might have been close when he found her. Maybe they'd followed. Maybe they were still watching. He turned back to the barn, his pulse quickening. Grace was awake, her head lifting when he stepped inside. Her eyes followed him with a quiet question. He crouched beside her, stroking her neck. "You rest easy, girl. I just need to see what's what." He grabbed his old Winchester from the wall, checked the chamber, and slung it over his shoulder. Then he followed the trail. The snow creaked beneath each careful step. The cold had a way of magnifying sound. Every breath seemed too loud. Every branch that snapped felt like a warning. The tracks climbed toward the ridge, weaving between pines heavy with ice. Halfway up, he found another sign, a piece of torn cloth caught on a low branch. Dark canvas, coarse weave. He tugged it free and sniffed. It smelled faintly of oil and smoke. Workman's gear. At the ridge, the tracks vanished into a clearing flattened by hooves. A dead campfire sat at the center, ringed with stones blackened by smoke. Noah knelt, running his fingers over the ashes, still warm beneath the crust. Someone had been here within hours. He studied the ground again and found what he dreaded most, a boot print. Deep heel, square toe. The kind worn by men who worked for Silas Crowell's mining company. A chill that had nothing to do with weather crawled down his back. He'd heard plenty of talk in town about Crowell's operations expanding north. Folks said he'd bought land that wasn't his, cleared out homesteads and reclaimed wild stock that just happened to stray onto his property. Nobody had proof, but everyone had suspicions. Noah straightened, jaw tightening. "You're running stock for Crowell," he whispered to the empty woods. "And you lost one." Behind him, the trees creaked under a gust of wind. He turned sharply, rifle half raised, but it was only the snow falling from a limb. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling he wasn't alone. He made his way back down as the sky began to cloud again, the early light fading into a dull gray. When he reached the cabin, Lila's tracks were fresh in the snow beside the door. Inside, the warmth had returned. Lila knelt by Grace, replacing the bandage on her leg. The mare stood this time, weak but upright, her breath steady. Lila looked up as he entered. "She's tougher than she looks," she said. "So are you," Noah replied, setting the rifle by the door. He pulled the torn cloth from his pocket and tossed it on the workbench. "Found this up by the ridge. Someone camped there last night." Lila examined it, frowning. "Mining canvas. Crowell's?" She nodded. "His men use that stuff for tent lining." "You're thinking what I'm thinking. That this mare didn't wander here by accident." Lila stood, wiping her hands on a rag. "If Crowell's men were setting traps in this valley, they're working off the books. The law should know." Noah almost laughed. "You mean Sheriff Kincaid? He's been on Crowell's payroll for years. The law won't touch him." Her expression hardened. "Then who will?" He didn't answer right away. Grace shifted, her tail flicking against the stall wall. The question hung in the cold air, heavy as a weight neither of them wanted to lift. Finally, Noah said, "I don't know yet. But if they're hunting wild mares, pregnant ones, they're doing it for money. Crowell sells horses to the army. Strong stock fetches good coin. Maybe he wants to breed his own line." Lila's eyes flashed with disgust. "Trap them, cripple them, break them for profit." Noah looked at Grace, standing proud despite her scars. "She broke free," he said quietly. "That's what they didn't count on." Lila's voice softened. "And now she's yours to protect." He met her gaze, the kind of look that said more than words could. Maybe it's the other way around. They spent the afternoon repairing the roof, clearing snow from the trough, and setting more hay inside. Grace watched them the whole time, her ears flicking at every sound. When Noah brushed her mane, she leaned slightly into his hand, a simple gesture that carried more trust than any man in town had ever shown him. By sunset, a pink glow painted the mountains. Lila gathered her things, pulling on her gloves. "I'll head back before dark. Bring feed tomorrow." "Appreciate it," Noah said, walking her to the door. She paused before mounting her horse. "If you see anyone near here, don't play hero. Come find me." He managed a faint smile. Wasn't planning on dying for pride. "Good," she said, swinging into the saddle. "Just remember, storms don't always come from the sky." He watched her ride off until the snow swallowed her shape. Then he turned back to the barn. The brazier glowed low, and Grace dozed in the straw, her breathing slow, peaceful. Noah hung his hat on the peg and sat beside her. The quiet was deeper than before, not empty, but watchful. The kind of silence that waits for something to happen. He stared at the rope with Crowell's mark hanging from the post. The wind outside had died completely now, leaving only the faint creak of the roof and the steady rhythm of the mare's breath. Noah leaned his head back, eyes on the rafters, and whispered to himself, "If they come looking for you, they'll find me first." Grace's ear twitched, as if she'd heard him. The small movement brought a strange comfort, the kind only living things could give in a dead cold morning. Noah sat there for a while longer, watching the brazier fade from orange to dull ember. The barn smelled of wet straw, smoke, and horse sweat, all the scents of a hard life, but familiar ones. When dawn slid across the valley again, the world outside the shack shimmered under a crust of frost. Sage Bluff looked almost peaceful from the ridge. A cluster of smoke-streaked roofs, the faint glint of the blacksmith's forge, and far beyond, the dark line of the Crowell mines chewing through the mountainside. Noah rubbed the sleep from his eyes, strapped on his worn belt, and stepped outside. His breath fogged the air like steam. He couldn't sit still. The thought of that burned rope with Crowell Mine Company stamped into it had gnawed at him all night. He had to know if it meant what he feared it did. Before leaving, he stopped beside the mare. Grace lifted her head, ears pricked. "I'll be back before dark," he promised, running a hand down her neck. "You behave, hear?" She snorted softly, and he almost smiled. He saddled his gelding and rode down into town, hooves crunching on the frozen earth. The morning sun had teeth, cold, hard, and bright. As he passed the saloon, a few early drinkers peeked through the frosted windows. They watched him the way men watch trouble that hasn't quite decided where to land. The Crowell office sat at the far end of Main Street, a tall wooden building with fresh paint and iron hinges that gleamed like silver. "Prosperity through industry," the sign above the door read. Noah dismounted, tied his horse, and climbed the steps. Inside, warmth rolled over him. Heat from a coal stove, the smell of cigars, and a low murmur of clerks scratching pens across ledgers. Behind a polished desk sat Silas Crowell, the man whose name hung over half the valley. He was everything the stories said. Silver hair slicked back, mustache trimmed to a knife's edge, suit too fine for a mining town. His smile was wide but cold, the kind of smile men wear when they already own the answer. "Well, if it isn't Noah Briggs," Crowell said, setting down his cigar. "I was told you'd run off to the Dakotas. Guess they let you keep your skin after all." "Didn't have much worth taking," Noah said, his tone flat. Crowell chuckled. "That's the spirit. What brings you here, son? Looking for work? I can always use another pair of hands, though I heard you've taken up animal rescue instead." The words cut closer than they should have. "Found a mare in the storm," Noah said carefully. "Looked like she stepped into a trap. One with your company's rope on it." Crowell raised an eyebrow. "Mine? You sure?" "I saw the mark. Crowell Mine Coney burnt right into the leather." The older man leaned back, steepling his fingers. "I own a lot of rope, Mr. Briggs. Some of it ends up in places it shouldn't. Doesn't mean I'm snaring horses on my day off." "Somebody was," Noah said, "and she nearly died for it." Crowell's smile thinned. "You know, I respect a man who cares for dumb beasts. It speaks of gentleness. But you'd best remember this valley isn't kind to dreamers. That land up there?" He pointed toward the window, toward the snow-blind ridges. "It belongs to the company, every inch of it. Anything running wild out there, deer, wolf, or horse, belongs to us once it crosses that line. Property, Briggs. That's the word." Noah's jaw clenched. "Horses don't belong to anybody." Crowell tapped ash into a crystal tray. "That's a fine sermon, but it won't buy you feed. The world runs on ownership, not sentiment. Now, if you're looking to earn, I can pay you for that mare. Pregnant, you say? I could use her stock." Noah stared at him. "You want to buy the horse I pulled out of your trap?" Crowell smiled again, all teeth. "You can dress it up however you want, son. But in the end, a beast like that's worth more in my corral than dying in your barn." The words landed like a slap. Noah turned toward the door. "I think we're done." "Suit yourself," Crowell said behind him. "But I'd watch that ridge, Mr. Briggs. The mountains remember their debts." Outside, Noah stood in the biting wind, chest tight with anger. He could feel the weight of the town pressing in, men loading wagons, women fetching water, smoke rising from chimneys. Everyone lived under Crowell's thumb and knew better than to challenge him. He walked past the saloon, where laughter spilled from inside. As he passed, a familiar voice called out, "Briggs, hold up!" It was Rhett Malloy, Crowell's foreman, a broad man with a scar running from his ear to his jaw. His coat was open despite the cold, his confidence worn like armor. "Heard you been meddling where you shouldn't," Malloy said, stepping into the street. "That mare you found? She's company property." Noah didn't stop walking. "Then tell your company to take better care of what's theirs." Malloy's hand shot out, grabbing his arm. "You think you're some kind of hero? Noah met his eyes, cold and steady. No, just someone who's tired of bullies. For a long moment, they stared each other down. Then Malloy's mouth twisted into a grin. You always were stupid brave. Tell you what, I'll give you a day. Get rid of that horse before sunset tomorrow. After that, I can't promise she'll still be breathing. Or you. He released Noah's arm and sauntered back toward the saloon, whistling off-key. Noah stood there, snow swirling around his boots, heart hammering. He'd seen men like Malloy before, dogs who barked loud because they had someone meaner holding the leash. But this time he couldn't just walk away. By the time he rode back up to his ridge, the light was thinning. The mountains loomed darker, the sky streaked with red. In the barn, Grace lifted her head when he entered, her breath misting the air. Seems we've both made enemies, he murmured, kneeling beside her. But don't you worry. We're not backing down. He ran his hand down her neck, feeling the heat of her skin. Beneath his palm, her heartbeat drummed slow and steady. She'd survived the storm. She could survive this too. Noah sat back, the anger cooling into resolve. If Crowell wanted to claim everything wild, he'd have to go through him first. Outside, the wind began to rise again, carrying the smell of distant smoke. The ridge stretched silent and endless, but Noah swore he could hear something moving beyond the trees, faint hoofbeats, too light for his own horse. He stared into the dark until the sound faded. Somewhere out there, men were setting more traps, and somewhere deeper still, something wild was watching back. The sound of it lingered long after Noah closed the barn door behind him, like the echo of hooves muffled under snow, a whisper at the edge of hearing. He told himself it was just wind through the trees, but the feeling stayed, tight in his chest. Night pressed down on Sage Bluff again. The temperature dropped so fast, it felt as though the air itself had frozen mid-breath. Inside the barn, the small brazier threw trembling light across the beams. Noah tossed in another handful of wood scraps, watching the sparks climb and die. Grace shifted uneasily in her stall. Her breathing had grown rougher through the evening, a low rumble deep in her chest. Sweat darkened her neck despite the cold. When she tried to put weight on the injured leg, it trembled, then buckled. Easy, girl, Noah murmured, stepping to her side. The smell of iron filled the air, blood. He knelt, heart hammering. The wound had opened again. The bandage Lila had tied that morning was soaked through, the linen sticky and dark. He worked quickly, cutting the cloth free and wiping the gash with clean snow. Grace tossed her head but didn't fight him. He whispered to her, voice low, steady, almost prayerful. You made it through a storm. You can make it through this. He found the small tin of salve Lila had left behind, its metal lid cold against his fingers. He scooped a bit out, spreading it along the cut. The mare flinched, a sharp sound that cut through the quiet like the snap of a whip. Noah winced too, as if the pain were shared between them. When he finished wrapping a fresh strip of cloth around her leg, he leaned his forehead against her shoulder. Her body radiated heat. You're all right now, he whispered, more to convince himself than her. He fed her a handful of oats from his last sack, then sat back against the stall post. The firelight flickered across the walls, painting the barn in shades of gold and shadow. Outside, the wind rose and fell like the breath of a sleeping giant. For a while, it was almost peaceful. Then Grace jolted upright, eyes wide, nostrils flaring. She snorted, stamping her hoof. Noah was on his feet instantly, hand going to the rifle near the door. What is it? He whispered. A heartbeat later came the crunch of snow outside. Slow, deliberate steps. Not animal. Human. He slid the bolt on the rifle back with a quiet click, then eased toward the door. Through the narrow gap between the planks, he saw a flicker of lantern light weaving between the pines. Two shadows moved through the snow, low voices carrying on the wind. Can't have lost her tracks here, one said. Crowell'll have my hide if we come back empty. Noah's pulse spiked. They were looking for Grace. He waited, breath shallow, until the voices faded. The lantern glow slipped farther into the dark, swallowed by trees. He didn't move until silence returned, thick as the snow. When he turned, back to Grace, she was trembling from head to tail. Her eyes caught the firelight, bright and wild. He laid a hand against her neck. They won't get you, he said softly. Not while I'm breathing. But the promise cost him more than he admitted. He knew what kind of men Crowell sent, the kind who didn't mind doing ugly work as long as the pay was good. If they found out he'd defied the mine owner twice, there'd be a reckoning. By the time Lila arrived the next morning, Noah looked like he hadn't slept at all. His eyes were rimmed red, his hands still stained with blood and salve. She took one look at him and frowned. What happened? She tore the wound open, he said, motioning to the leg. And Crowell's men were up near the ridge last night. Lila's face went pale. Did they see you? No, but they're close. She knelt beside the mare, touching the new bandage. You did good work, she said quietly. Then her gaze met his. But this can't go on, Noah. If they find her here, if they find you, they'll make it look like an accident. I'm not handing her over, he said. I'm not asking you to. Her voice softened. But maybe there's another way. A place they won't follow. She glanced toward the distant ridge through the open door. You ever heard of the Hollow of Ash? He frowned. Old Harlan Finch used to tell stories about it. Said wild herds still run there. Nobody believes him. Maybe they should, Lila said. He lives up by the creek, doesn't he? If anyone knows a safe trail, it's him. Noah hesitated, then nodded slowly. I'll go at first light tomorrow. Grace needs a real chance. Lila gathered her things, cinching her coat tight. Then I'll get you supplies. Feed, medicine, bandages. You'll have to move fast. If Crowell's setting traps, he's not waiting for spring. When she left, the barn felt emptier than before. Noah sat in the straw beside Grace, running his thumb along the scar at her neck. We're running out of time, he whispered. Outside, twilight crept down the mountains, and the cold sharpened like a blade. He built the fire higher, the light spilling warm across the mare's body. She exhaled in long, slow sighs, her eyelids heavy but trusting. As the night deepened, Noah leaned against the post, half asleep. A crack of wind rattled the door, and in the flicker of flame he thought he saw movement again, a shadow sliding past the small window. He froze, breath held. The shape lingered a heartbeat, then was gone. He stood motionless, listening. The woods were silent now, but the silence didn't feel empty. It felt like waiting. When he finally sat down again, Grace shifted closer, pressing her head against his shoulder as if to steady him. He smiled faintly and whispered, We'll find that hollow, girl. Somewhere out there, the world's still kind. The fire crackled, throwing light against their faces, one man and one wounded creature, bound by something neither could name. And outside, in the vast white valley of Sage Bluff, the darkness gathered quietly around the mountain trails, hiding footprints that would soon lead to war. By morning, a thin crust of ice glazed every surface. The trees glimmered silver, the world still and cruelly bright. Noah woke stiff and cold on the barn floor, the coals in the brazier long dead. Grace stirred beside him, her breath clouding the air. Her wound looked cleaner today, though the legs still trembled when she tried to bear weight. He fed her what little hay he had left, then stepped out into the dawn. The wind had quieted, but it carried a strange tension, as though the whole valley were holding its breath. At the edge of his yard, Boot prints cut a fresh path through the snow. They came from the road and stopped right at the barn door. Noah knelt, his heart tightening. Whoever had been there hadn't come to talk. They'd been watching. He followed the tracks a few yards before they disappeared into the drifts, heading toward town. He didn't like being followed. But there was one man in Sage Bluff who'd know whether Crowell's men had been out that way, the sheriff himself. He saddled his gelding and rode down the hill. The snow crunched under hooves, echoing off the silent slopes. By the time he reached Main Street, the sun had risen just enough to reveal the smoke curling from chimneys and the muted life of the town returning. The sheriff's office sat beside the general store, a squat building with cracked windows and a door that always creaked when opened. Inside, it smelled of pipe smoke, old coffee, and dust. Sheriff Amos Kincaid sat behind his desk, boots up, hat tilted low over his brow. He was a man gone soft around the middle, but with a pair of eyes sharp enough to cut glass. When Noah stepped inside, Kincaid didn't bother looking up. "Well, well," he drawled. "Didn't think I'd see you in here again, unless it was to pay a fine." "I ain't here to pay," Noah said. "I'm here to ask." "That so?" The sheriff tipped his hat back, revealing a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "You make a habit of asking lawmen for favors, Briggs?" "I make a habit of asking when someone trespasses on my land," Noah replied, setting his hands on the edge of the desk. "You know anything about Crowell's men setting traps near my ridge?" Kincaid's smile thinned. "Traps? You're seeing things. Those hills are Crowell's property now." "They weren't when I bought the deed," Noah shot back. The sheriff leaned forward, his chair creaking. "You lost that spread fair and square when the drought hit. Ain't no sense hanging on to ghosts." Noah felt heat crawl up his neck. "So Crowell can just take what he wants? Rope wild horses, burn brands into them, and call it business?" Kincaid blew out a slow breath through his nose, tapping ash into a dented tin tray. "You got proof?" "I got the mare," Noah said. "And the rope she was trapped in. Your man Crowell's mark is burnt clear as day." The sheriff chuckled low. "A rope? That's your proof?" He stood, stretching lazily. "Listen, Briggs, you're a good hand, but you ain't got the weight to throw around accusations like that. You start stirring trouble, you'll drown in it. Then I guess I'll learn to swim." The words came out rough, surprising even him. The sheriff's grin faded. He studied Noah for a long moment, then said, "You ought to take my advice. Stay out of this. Let Crowell run his business. The man keeps this town fed." Noah turned to leave, jaw tight. "He doesn't feed me." "Then maybe you should have worked harder when you had land worth keeping," Kincaid said coldly. Noah stopped in the doorway. The air in the room thickened. For a heartbeat, the only sound was the clock ticking on the wall. "I worked harder than any man in this town," Noah said quietly. "And I still lost everything. Don't talk to me about fair." He walked out before the sheriff could answer. The sunlight hit him like a slap. Across the street, a few townsfolk paused to watch him pass, men who remembered when he'd owned a stretch of pasture now covered in Crowell's fences. They nodded politely, but their eyes said, "Don't drag us into it." By the time he reached the ridge again, his anger had settled into something colder. The world up here looked untouched, but he knew better. He found the prints from the night before, still sharp in the snow, circling his barn. One set of tracks had stopped right where Grace slept. He checked the latch on the barn door. It was cracked, not broken. Someone had tried to open it quietly. He went inside. Grace lifted her head as soon as he appeared, ears forward, nostrils flaring. He could tell she smelled whoever it was, too. He ran a hand along her neck to calm her, whispering soft words that steadied them both. "You're safe," he said. "I won't let them near you." He patched the latch, then stacked wood against the inside of the door. The barn wasn't much of a fortress, but it was all he had. By mid-afternoon, Lila rode up the hill, a satchel slung over her shoulder. She brought medicine, a sack of oats, and the smell of frost and smoke on her clothes. "You saw the sheriff?" she asked as she dismounted. "Yeah, he's as useful as a hole in a bucket." She sighed. "I thought as much. He's been taking Crowell's coin for years. I'm sorry, Noah." He shook his head. "Not your fault." She unpacked the supplies while he told her about the footprints, about the men outside the barn last night. Her expression hardened. "They'll be back," she said. "Maybe not tonight, but soon." "I know." She looked up from her work. "Then we move her. Tomorrow." He hesitated. "The hollow? It's the only chance she's got." They worked in silence after that, each lost in thought. The fire in the brazier glowed soft, and the wind outside began to rise again. The sound of it filled the barn, low and endless, like the sea. When Lila left near dusk, Noah walked her to her horse. The horizon bled red and gold, the last light of day catching on the frost. "Be careful," she said, tightening her gloves. "You've got too much to lose now." He nodded, watching her ride away until she vanished behind the ridge. Then he turned back to the barn. The shadows inside had lengthened. Grace lay resting, her breathing deep and slow. Noah fed the fire one last time, then sat beside her, rifle across his knees. He stared at the door until his eyes blurred. Somewhere far off, a wolf howled, a long, mournful sound that rolled across the valley. Grace stirred, lifting her head, and Noah whispered, "Don't worry, girl. Wolves hunt what's weak. We ain't weak." Still, he couldn't shake the image of Sheriff Kincaid's smirk, or the cold emptiness in those words. "Stay out of this." The wind moaned through the cracks in the walls, and the fire hissed in reply, as if the whole valley had begun to speak in a single low warning. Noah sat awake long after the flames faded to embers. The weight of Lila's words echoed in his head. "Tomorrow we move her." Every part of him knew she was right, but another part refused to believe they could outrun the kind of men who hunted for coin and power. Still, dawn always demanded something. When the first gray light crept through the boards, he rose stiffly, fed the gelding, and checked Grace's leg. The swelling had gone down. She favored the leg but stood stronger than she had in days. "Looks like you're ready for a journey," he said quietly. The mare blinked at him, ears twitching. "Guess we both are." By the time Lila arrived, the sun had climbed above the ridge, spilling a pale wash of gold over the valley. She wore a long oilskin coat and carried a saddlebag packed with bandages, herbs, and enough food for 2 days. "You sure she can travel?" Lila asked. "She'll manage," Noah said, "but I'll walk her most of the way." "Good," she replied, "because the hollow isn't on any map. We'll need someone who remembers where it used to be." Noah frowned. "Harlan Finch." Lila nodded. "If the stories are true, he's the only one who's seen it and lived to tell about it." They moved carefully down the trail that wound through the spruce trees, the snow softening under the morning sun. The silence felt heavy but alive. Ravens calling in the distance, the crunch of hooves behind them. Grace followed willingly, her gait uneven but determined. Harlan Finch's cabin sat half-hidden beside a frozen creek, the chimney belching thin smoke. Noah tied his gelding to a fence post and knocked on the door. After a moment, it opened just enough for an old man's lined face to appear through the gap. "Well, I'll be damned," Harlan muttered. "Didn't think you'd still be breathing after that blizzard, Briggs." "Barely am," Noah said. "We need your help." The old man's eyes shifted to the mare behind him. His expression softened. "That's no ranch horse," he said. Where'd you find her? In the storm, Noah answered. Half buried, half dead. Harlan stepped outside, moving with the careful stiffness of age. He approached Grace slowly, palms out, speaking in a low rasp. Easy, girl. Easy now. Grace sniffed at him, then snorted softly. The old man nodded. She's wild, all right. One of the ridge herd. You've seen them? Lila asked. Seen more than most believe, Harlan replied, running a hand over Grace's flank. They've roamed those mountains longer than any of us. Strong bloodlines, smart too. But lately, something's been driving them down from the high country. Crowell, Noah said bitterly. Harlan's mouth turned grim. Ain't surprised. That man's been setting steel where he's got no right. Heard he's paying trappers to bring him live mares. Something about a contract with the army. Lila glanced toward the trees. We need a place he can't follow. You know the hollow, don't you? The old man hesitated. You sure you want to find it? We don't have much choice, Noah said. If we stay here, they'll come tonight or the next. Harlan studied him for a long moment, then gave a slow nod. All right, I'll take you part way. The rest, the mare will have to show you. He turned toward the creek, pointing to the far ridge where sunlight caught on a line of cliffs. There's a cut up there between two peaks, the kind you'd miss unless you knew where to look. That's the door to the hollow. The land past it's different. Warmer, greener, even in winter. It's where the herds go when the snow's too deep. Lila looked skeptical. Sounds like a fairy tale. Maybe it is, Harlan said with a faint smile. But some stories stick around for a reason. They left before noon, following the frozen creek until the trees thinned into open country. Harlan rode beside them for a mile, his old mare stepping carefully through the drifts. When the trail began to climb, he pulled his reins and stopped. This is as far as I go, he said. The hollow doesn't like too many strangers, but keep your eyes sharp. If you see ravens circling together, you're close. He turned his horse, then paused. Noah, you remember something for me. The land don't belong to men who fence it. It belongs to those who keep it alive. Noah nodded. I'll remember. When Harlan rode back toward the creek, his figure vanished quickly among the trees, swallowed by the pale light. They continued up the slope, the air thinning, colder. Clouds gathered along the peaks like bruises. Grace walked between them, head high, ears twitching to sounds neither of them could hear. After an hour, the wind changed direction. It carried a new scent. Wood smoke, faint but sharp. Lila caught Noah's arm. Someone's up ahead. They crept along a stand of rocks until the source came into view. A makeshift camp at the base of the cliff, a fire still smoldering, the snow around it trampled by horses. Noah crouched low, scanning the ground. He picked up a coil of wire snare half buried under ash. Crowell's men, he whispered. They've been running traps here too. Lila's face hardened. If they find us? They won't, Noah cut her off. Not if we move fast. They led Grace around the camp and began the steep climb toward the ridge. The mare's breath came heavy, but she never faltered. As they neared the top, the light dimmed. The clouds thickened into a gray ceiling, and the first flakes of new snow began to fall. At the summit, the trail opened suddenly into a narrow pass. On either side, cliffs rose like cathedral walls, streaked with ice. Beyond them lay a valley, veiled in mist, the air strangely warm, almost humming. Lila gasped. It's real. Grace stepped forward, ears pricked, and gave a soft, ringing whinny that carried into the fog. Somewhere deep in the valley, an answering call echoed back, a sound like thunder wrapped in music. Noah stared into the mist, his heart pounding. She's calling them, he said. And then he realized Crowell's men weren't the only ones who'd been watching the mountains. The wild horses had been watching too. The snow thickened, swirling around them, but Grace pressed ahead, unafraid. She led them down the other side of the pass, into the waiting silence of the hidden valley. Behind them, far below, the faint echo of hammering hooves drifted through the storm. Noah didn't look back. He knew what it meant. Riders were moving, and the valley that had seemed so far from the world was already being hunted. The snow came down harder, swirling in a silver blur that erased the trail behind them. The wind whistled through the pass like a scream that never stopped. Grace pushed forward, head low, nostrils flaring against the cold. Her breath rose in clouds of white. Noah walked beside her, one hand on her reins, the other gripping the rock wall for balance. Lila followed a few steps behind, leading the pack horse that carried their supplies. They descended for nearly an hour before the ground leveled out. The storm thickened, burying everything in white silence. The light dimmed until it was hard to tell where the sky ended and the land began. Then, through the haze, Noah spotted the dark outline of an old hunter's cabin half collapsed against the trees. "Over there!" he shouted above the wind. They stumbled toward it, fighting drifts that rose to their knees. When they reached the cabin, Noah shouldered the door open with a groan. The hinges screamed, then gave way. Inside, the air was musty but dry, smelling of dust and old pine. He dragged the brazier from their pack and sparked a small fire while Lila guided Grace into the shelter of the porch, half covered from the wind. The mare trembled violently now, her flanks slick with sweat despite the freezing air. Lila pressed her hand to Grace's side and went still. "Noah," she said quietly. "She's going into labor." He turned, disbelief flickering through the exhaustion. "Now? In this storm?" Lila nodded, eyes steady. "There's no stopping it." Noah's pulse quickened. "Tell me what to do." "Get the lanterns lit," she said, her voice all calm precision. "Boil water if you can. Tear those saddle blankets. I'll need them clean." He moved fast, his body acting before his mind could catch up. He poured water into a dented pot, set it over the fire, tore the blankets into strips, and brought every scrap of warmth he could find. The wind battered the cabin walls, shaking snow from the rafters. But inside, a different storm had begun. Grace shifted restlessly, lowering herself onto the straw-covered floor. Her sides heaved, each breath sharp and ragged. Lila knelt beside her, whispering steady words that sounded half prayer, half command. "Easy, girl. Easy now. You're safe." Noah crouched near Grace's head, stroking her damp mane. He could feel the tremor of her muscles through his palms, the wild heartbeat that matched his own. "You're not alone," he murmured. "We're right here." Hours seemed to stretch into forever. The wind shrieked outside, rattling the loose boards, and thunder rolled somewhere far across the mountains. Lila worked tirelessly, hands sure even when the light flickered. Noah did what she told him, fetched water, held Grace still, whispered comfort when the mare cried out in pain. Then, in one final convulsion, a small, slick body slid onto the straw. For a moment, the world went completely still. The foal lay motionless, tiny chest barely stirring. "Come on," Lila whispered, clearing its nose and mouth. "Breathe, little one, breathe." Grace let out a low groan, stretching her neck toward the foal. She began licking it with desperate urgency, her breath steaming in the lantern light. The cabin filled with the sound of her laboring breath, the rhythmic rasp of a mother calling life back from the brink. Then, faint but clear, the foal gasped. Its chest lifted once, twice, and a weak whinny broke the silence. Noah laughed under his breath, a sound that was half sob, half joy. "There it is," he said, voice shaking. "There it is." Grace nuzzled the newborn, curling her body protectively around it. The foal's coat shimmered silver under the firelight, its legs long and clumsy. Lila sat back on her heels, wiping her brow. "Strong heart," she said softly. "It'll live." Noah exhaled, the tension draining from him like water from a cracked barrel. He looked at the two of them, the mare and her newborn, and felt something he hadn't felt in years: pure hope. But hope never stayed long in these parts. A sound rose outside, faint at first, then sharper. The crunch of snow under boots, more than one pair. Lila froze. Noah reached for his rifle. The firelight wavered across his face as he moved to the window. Through the fogged glass, he saw lanterns bobbing between the trees. Shadows moved, slow and deliberate. "They found us," Lila whispered. Noah's grip tightened on the rifle. "Stay back." He stepped outside into the storm. Snow stung his face, wind clawing at his coat. The lanterns were closer now. 3, maybe 4 men moving in a line. "Briggs!" a voice called through the blizzard. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Noah recognized the voice. Rhett Malloy. He lifted the rifle, but didn't aim yet. "Turn around, Malloy. There's nothing for you here." Malloy laughed, the sound cutting through the wind. "That horse is company property. You hand her over, and maybe Crowell lets you keep your skin." Noah's jaw tightened. "You tell Crowell she belongs to herself now." Malloy's tone darkened. "Wrong answer." The crack of a rifle split the air. The bullet slammed into the cabin wall behind Noah, sending splinters flying. He dove for cover, heart hammering. Inside, Grace neighed sharply, stamping her hooves. The foal cried, a thin, frightened sound. Lila grabbed the lantern and crouched beside the mare. "We can't stay," she shouted. "They'll burn us out." Noah looked around desperately. The storm raged, half hiding the world in smoke-white chaos. "Back trail's blocked," he yelled. "But there's the river gully. We can lose them. There!" He ran inside, snatched the blankets, and draped one around the foal. "Can she move?" "She'll try," Lila said, eyes fierce. They pushed open the back door, the wind nearly tearing it from its hinges. Snow swirled in, stinging their faces. Grace stumbled once but found her footing. The foal pressed close to her side. "Go!" Noah shouted. They plunged into the storm, the blizzard swallowing them whole. Behind them, gunfire cracked again, muffled by the wind. Lantern light flared and faded as the men gave chase. The river gully opened like a wound in the earth, half frozen, half flowing under sheets of ice. Noah led them down into it, boots sliding on the slick stones. Grace followed, limping but determined, the foal at her flank. When the gunfire faded, only the storm remained. They found shelter beneath an overhang of rock, hidden from the ridge above. Noah collapsed to his knees, chest heaving, snow crusting his beard. Lila knelt beside Grace, checking the foal. It shivered but breathed strong, its tiny heart fluttering against her palm. "They're alive," she said, voice trembling with relief. Noah looked at her, at the mare standing guard over her young, and felt something settle deep inside him. A quiet, steady resolve. "So are we," he said. Outside, the blizzard screamed across the mountains, erasing all tracks, all signs of pursuit. Somewhere far away, Malloy's men searched in vain, and in the hollow beneath the cliffs, a new life took its first breaths. Fragile, defiant, and alive against all odds. The storm had given birth to more than a foal that night. It had birthed a promise. By dawn, the sky hung low and heavy with mist. The snow muted into soft drifts that sparkled under a faint gray light. The wind had died, but silence pressed just as hard. Noah crouched by the edge of the overhang, peering toward the ridge where Crowell's men had vanished hours before. Nothing moved now, only a curtain of falling snow erasing every sign of pursuit. Behind him, under the stone shelter, Lila knelt beside the foal. It slept, nestled against its mother's flank, a patchwork of light and shadow trembling across its new coat. Grace kept her head low, ears twitching with each small sound. Her body trembled with exhaustion, but her eyes held a wild, protective fire. Noah turned back to them and let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "They won't find us now," he said quietly. Lila didn't look up. "They will," she answered. "Men like that always do." Her voice was calm, not frightened, just certain. Noah studied her for a moment. She had the same stubborn set to her jaw that Grace did. He realized they were both born of the same thing, creatures who refused to break. He fed the fire with what little kindling they had left. The smoke curled upward into the hollow, carrying the scent of pine and wet earth. The storm had passed, but the clouds above the valley still churned like something restless. By afternoon, the foal stood on wobbly legs for the first time. Grace nosed it gently, encouraging it to walk. The sight tore something open in Noah. He'd seen death enough times to forget what new life looked like. Now, standing in that cold, secret place, it felt like watching a prayer come true. Lila smiled softly. "He's strong," she said. "Stronger than most grown horses I've treated." Noah chuckled. "Takes after his mother." Grace lifted her head at the sound of his voice, eyes bright beneath her tangled mane. The foal stumbled once, then took another step. It wasn't just survival. It was defiance. But the peace didn't last long. The wind shifted again, carrying with it a sound Noah knew too well, the distant creak of leather and the dull clank of metal. "Riders," he muttered. Lila's head snapped up. "How far?" "Close enough." He rose, scanning the ridge through the falling snow. Through the mist, faint figures moved. 3, maybe 4 men on horseback, lanterns swaying like ghost lights. "They're sweeping the valley," Noah said. "Crowell's dogs don't give up easy." Lila looked toward Grace and the foal. "We can't run. Not yet." "Then we fight." She blinked at him. "With what?" "You've got 1 rifle and half a dozen bullets." "Then I'll make everyone count." He turned to her, eyes steady. "Can you handle a shotgun?" "I grew up on a ranch," she said. Not all doctors were born gentle. He tossed her the old double barrel he'd kept, wrapped in canvas. She caught it cleanly, checked the chamber, and nodded once. They moved quickly. Noah scattered ashes over the fire to dim its glow, then positioned themselves along the edge of the overhang. The riders were closer now, their voices faint through the snow. "Crowell says they're holed up near the river," one shouted. "Find the tracks." Noah sighted down his rifle, breath slow and measured. He didn't want blood, but he'd spill it before letting them near that mare or her foal. The first man broke through the line of trees, his lantern cutting a bright arc across the valley floor. Noah waited until the light caught his face. Malloy. Even from this distance, he recognized the man's grin. Malloy raised his hand, signaling the others to fan out. "Spread wide. The tracks lead here." Noah whispered, "Now." He squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked through the valley, sharp as lightning. The bullet hit the lantern dead center, shattering it into a burst of flame and oil. The light went out, plunging the ridge into sudden darkness. The riders shouted, startled, scrambling for cover. Lila fired next, her blast tearing through the branches above them. Snow poured down like a curtain, cloaking the hollow in a fresh white veil. "Fall back!" one of the men yelled. Noah didn't shoot again. He wanted them scared, not dead. The echoes of gunfire rolled through the hills until the valley swallowed them whole. Then, silence. He waited several minutes before lowering his rifle. "They'll be back," Lila said quietly, reloading. "Not tonight," Noah replied. "They'll think the storm finished what they started." Grace shifted behind them, stamping once. The foal stumbled, pressing close to her leg. Noah turned toward them, lowering his rifle completely. "We need to move again come sunrise," he said. "The hollow's deeper ahead. Harlan was right. This place won't let strangers stay long." Lila nodded, her face pale in the dim light. "There's a spring beyond the ridge. I saw it when we came down. We can rest there tomorrow." For the first time all night, Noah allowed himself to breathe. He glanced up at the narrow slit of sky visible through the overhang. Snow still drifted down, but softer now, almost tender. He crouched beside Grace, resting his hand on her neck. "You did good, girl. Real good." The mare exhaled softly, lowering her head to nuzzle the foal again. The small creature blinked up at Noah, eyes wide and new, as if seeing the world for the first time. Lila sat near the fire, her shotgun resting across her knees. She looked at Noah, and for a brief moment, the tension between them eased. "You could have run," she said. "You didn't have to stay and fight." Noah shrugged. "There's a first time for everything." "Why this horse?" she asked softly. "Why risk your life for her?" He thought about it a long moment before answering. "Because nobody ever did that for me." The words hung in the air, simple and raw. The fire crackled, and outside the snow kept falling, quiet and endless. As night deepened, they took turns keeping watch. Lila dozed near the flames while Noah sat with his rifle, listening to the wind slide across the cliffs. Somewhere far off, an owl called, its voice carrying through the cold. When he looked back at Grace and her foal, both asleep at last, something in him softened. The fight wasn't over, he knew that. Crowell's men would return, maybe with more guns, more fire. But tonight, in this fragile hollow carved by storm and mercy, they had won. And for the first time since the blizzard began, Noah Briggs allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, the wild had chosen to fight beside him. The sun broke through the clouds the next morning for the first time in days. The light didn't bring warmth, but it cut through the mist that clung to the ridges, revealing peaks dusted with fresh snow and valleys still asleep under the storm's white shroud. Noah squinted at the horizon, the faint gold glow spilling over the mountains like a promise of peace that hadn't yet arrived. Grace and her foal stood near the fire pit, heads bowed together. The foal wobbled on its spindly legs, nuzzling its mother's neck. Lila crouched nearby, rubbing the little one's chest with a cloth to keep its circulation going. The sight made Noah's throat tighten. It was life carved out of death's shadow. But even beauty had its limits in a land ruled by men like Silas Crowell. The world outside that hollow still waited, and it wouldn't wait long. "We can't stay here," Lila said, her voice breaking the quiet. "The air's shifting. If Malloy made it back, they'll be regrouping by now." Noah nodded. "We head deeper. Harlan said the hollow lies beyond these ridges, a place no one can follow." Lila gave him a wary look. "You really think it's out there?" He shrugged. "The mare does." Grace lifted her head as if she'd heard, her ears pricking toward the east. The foal mimicked her, legs still unsure but eager. Noah smiled faintly. "See? She knows where she's going." They packed quickly, blankets, feed, a few scraps of food. The storm had wiped the world clean of tracks, giving them a few hours' grace. By mid-morning, they were climbing again, following Grace's slow but steady pace along a narrow trail that wound between cliffs. The higher they went, the stranger the air felt. Warmer somehow, tinged with the smell of wet earth rather than ice. The snow underfoot grew thinner, giving way to patches of green moss and trickling water. Lila stopped once, touching a droplet that slid down a stone. "It shouldn't be thawing this high," she said softly. "Maybe the hollow's real after all," Noah replied. The trail opened suddenly into a wide bowl of land surrounded by jagged cliffs. It wasn't large, maybe half a mile across, but the ground here was alive. Streams ran clear between tufts of winter grass, and willows hung over the banks, their branches whispering in a wind that didn't feel like winter at all. The sun broke through the clouds just enough to turn everything silver green. Lila breathed out a laugh. "It's beautiful." Noah dismounted, staring around in disbelief. "It's like the storm never touched this place." Grace stepped forward, her hooves sinking into soft mud instead of snow. The foal followed, tail flicking. She let out a low whinny that echoed across the bowl, and then an answering call rose from the far side. They both froze. Out of the mist, movement rippled. A dozen, then 24 shapes, silhouettes against the light. Horses, wild and magnificent, coats gleaming in shades of bay, chestnut, and dun. They moved with perfect grace, their eyes sharp and intelligent. The herd. Grace lifted her head high and answered with a proud call that rolled through the valley like thunder. The herd shifted, watching, testing. Then one, a tall stallion with a black mane and silver blaze, stepped forward. He regarded Grace for a long moment before tossing his head, as if acknowledging her. "She's home," Lila whispered. Noah could hardly breathe. He'd seen herds before, ragged, half-broken things driven by hunger, but nothing like this. These animals looked untouched by man or hardship. They were freedom itself, alive and whole. But beauty always carried danger. A flicker of movement on the ridge caught Noah's eye, metal glinting against rock. He dropped to a crouch. "Down!" he hissed. Lila followed his gaze, her face blanching. On the far slope, tiny figures moved, men leading horses, their coats dark against the snow. Crowell's hunters. "They must have tracked us through the pass," she said. "How?" "They followed her scent," Noah interrupted. "Or maybe they just never stopped looking." He scanned the valley for cover. There wasn't much. Just low brush, a fallen tree, and the small stream cutting through the middle. "Get her to the herd," he said, grabbing Lila's arm. "If they take Grace, they'll find the rest." Lila hesitated. "You can't fight them alone." He gave a grim smile. "Wasn't planning to fight alone." As if she understood, Grace turned, stamping her hoof and snorting at the approaching men. The stallion answered with a piercing cry that shook the ground. The herd tensed. Dozens of heads lifted in unison, manes rippling in the strange, warm wind. Then, as the first rifle cracked from the ridge, chaos exploded. Noah's shot echoed back, hitting the rocks just below the nearest gunman. Horses scattered, the herd surging like a storm tide across the valley floor. Grace wheeled toward her foal, shielding it with her body. The stallion charged up the slope, his hooves striking sparks from stone. "Run!" Noah shouted to Lila. "Get them to cover!" She grabbed the foal's halter, pulling it toward the trees. Grace followed, her limp forgotten in the madness. Another gunshot rang out, and Noah saw one of the hunters fall, but another took his place. Bullets tore through branches as Noah fired again, driving them back toward the rocks. Then, through the chaos, he saw him, Malloy. The scarred man rode down the slope like a demon, rifle raised. His horse slipped, caught itself, and came on again. Noah ducked behind a boulder, chambering his last round. When Malloy came within 20 yards, he stepped out and fired. The bullet struck the man's rifle, shattering it from his grip. Malloy cursed, yanking his horse sideways. "You're a fool, Briggs," he shouted. "You can't save them all. Watch me." Before Malloy could draw his pistol, Grace charged. She hit his horse broadside, teeth bared, eyes burning with fury. Malloy went down hard, rolling in the mud. His horse bolted, disappearing into the trees. The rest of Crowell's men, seeing their leader fall, broke. They scattered up the ridge, vanishing into the snow and mist. The valley went quiet again. The only sound was the thunder of retreating hooves and the rush of the stream through thawing earth. Noah lowered his rifle, chest heaving. He turned toward Grace. She stood over Malloy's fallen form, sides heaving, the foal pressed against her legs. She'd taken a shallow cut across her shoulder, nothing fatal, but the blood streaked bright against her pale coat. Lila ran to her, tears streaking her cheeks. "You're all right," she whispered, pressing her forehead to the mare's neck. "You're all right." Noah stood beside them, his hands shaking from cold and adrenaline. "We've got to get her cleaned up," he said, "before infection sets in again." They worked until dusk, washing the wound and wrapping it in a strip of Lila's torn sleeve. The foal lay curled beside its mother, asleep at last. When the sun slipped behind the ridge, the valley glowed with an otherworldly light, soft gold spilling through the mist. Noah sat by the stream, his rifle across his knees, staring at the herd grazing in the distance. Grace and her foal rested safely among them, watched over by the black-maned stallion. Lila joined him quietly. "We found it," she said. "The hollow of ash." He nodded. "Yeah, but it's not a hiding place, it's a beginning." She smiled faintly. "Then what happens now?" Noah looked out across the valley, at the herd that had survived, the mare that refused to die, and the woman beside him who'd risked everything for both. "Now," he said, "we make sure it stays free." Above them, a hawk wheeled through the fading light, its cry slicing through the quiet like a promise. The next morning, the valley lay washed in a pale gold dawn. Mist coiled through the grass, glimmering where sunlight touched it. The herd grazed in clusters along the stream, their breath rising like smoke. Every so often, a stallion lifted his head, ears flicking, eyes fixed on the ridges that rimmed the hollow. Noah stood near the water's edge, hands buried deep in his coat pockets. He looked older than he had a week ago, eyes lined, beard dusted with frost, but alive in a way he hadn't been in years. Lila knelt nearby, checking Grace's bandage. The mare stood calmly, her foal leaning against her flank. The wound had scabbed over clean. "She's healing," Lila said. "Slow, but strong." "She's earned the right to rest," Noah replied. Grace lifted her head at his voice and nudged his shoulder. He smiled faintly, patting her neck. "That's right, girl. You did all the fighting for us." They shared a moment of quiet. The hollow seemed to breathe around them, its air thick with the scent of wet earth and wild mint. Yet beneath the peace, a tension simmered, the kind that comes before something breaks. Lila must have felt it too. "You think they'll come again?" she asked. Noah didn't answer at first. He was watching the ridges. Crowell's not the kind of man to accept defeat. He'll come, and he won't make the same mistake twice. As if summoned by the words, a rifle crack split the silence. The echo bounced off the cliffs, scattering the herd into motion. Grace flinched, but stayed by the foal, ears pinned back. "Down!" Noah shouted, grabbing Lila's arm and pulling her behind a rock. Another shot rang out, this one closer. He peered over the edge of the boulder. Riders moved along the northern slope, 5, maybe 6 of them, black shapes against the glare of morning. At their head rode Silas Crowell himself. His polished coat gleamed even through the distance, his hat low, his face set in that same cold smile Noah had seen in town. Beside him, Malloy rode again, bruised but very much alive. His sneer was twisted now, one eye swollen shut, but his rifle looked ready. "They found the pass," Lila whispered. Noah chambered around in his rifle. "Then we hold the hollow." The riders advanced in a line, moving slow, deliberate, confident. Behind them, more figures appeared, miners and hired guns, maybe a dozen in all. The kind of force meant to crush anything that stood in their way. Crowell's voice carried across the valley, smooth as silk. "Briggs, you've caused me enough trouble. Step aside and maybe I'll forget this ever happened. Noah shouted back. The hollow's not yours to take. Everything you stand on belongs to me, Crowell called. The deeds, the land, the beasts, they're all mine by right. Noah's anger flared hot and steady. You can't own what's free. Crowell's smile didn't waver. Then let's see how free it stays. He lifted a hand, and the first volley of gunfire thundered through the valley. Bullets chewed the earth around them. Noah and Lila ducked, the air alive with ricochets and dust. Grace bolted toward the herd, her cry cutting through the chaos. The stallion answered, rallying the horses. They began to circle, moving as one body, hooves drumming a rhythm that rolled through the hollow like thunder. Lila reloaded, her hands steady. If they get closer, we won't hold them off. Noah scanned the valley floor, mind racing. We don't need to, we just have to give the herd a way out. What? He pointed toward the southern ridge where a narrow chute of rock led down toward the open prairie. That pass. If we can drive them that way, they'll be beyond Crowell's reach. Lila hesitated. And us? He gave a tight smile. We'll figure that out when we get there. They crawled through the brush toward the main herd. The gunfire paused as Crowell's men reloaded. Grace stood tall amid the chaos, her foal pressed against her chest. The stallion circled nearby, stamping and snorting, waiting for a signal. Noah reached Grace, placing a hand on her side. You listening, girl? You've got one more run in you. Take them south. Follow the wind. Grace met his eyes, and for a heartbeat, he swore she understood. She let out a sharp cry, reared high, and struck the ground with her hooves. The sound echoed through the valley like a drumbeat. The herd answered, surging into motion. Crowell's men shouted as the wave of horses thundered toward them. But the hollow favored the wild. The ground here was uneven, full of hidden dips and loose stone. Horses darted through gaps no man could follow. Cut them off! Malloy bellowed. He spurred his horse forward, but Grace was faster. She crashed into him broadside, knocking the gun from his hands. Malloy hit the ground hard. Crowell shouted something lost in the noise. His horse reared, panicking as the herd swept around him. One stallion lashed out, striking his stirrup clean off. Crowell barely kept his seat. Noah and Lila ran along the ridge, firing as they went, forcing the riders back toward the cliffs. Each gunshot echoed like the heartbeat of the land itself, relentless, defiant. When the dust settled, the herd had reached the southern pass. The stallion led the charge, Grace and her foal close behind. They vanished into the open plain beyond, free once more under the endless sky. Crowell's men, realizing the fight was lost, began to retreat. Only Malloy remained, limping, fury twisting his face. He reached for the pistol on his belt, but Noah was faster. Don't, Noah said, leveling his rifle. Malloy froze, chest heaving. You think this changes anything? Crowell owns this valley. Not anymore. Noah lowered his aim and fired, a warning shot that split the dirt near Malloy's boot. The man flinched, then turned and fled down the ridge. Silas Crowell watched from horseback, jaw tight, pride bleeding into rage. He met Noah's eyes one last time, then wheeled his horse and rode after his men, the wind swallowing him whole. Silence fell. Smoke drifted across the valley, curling into the cold air. Noah dropped to his knees, exhausted. Lila sank beside him, breath ragged. You did it, she said, voice trembling. He shook his head. We did. And her. He glanced toward the ridge where Grace had disappeared. She led them out. Lila smiled faintly. The herd that wouldn't bow. Noah stared at the horizon where sunlight broke through the clouds, painting the plain in bands of gold. Guess some things never should. The wind shifted again, gentle this time, carrying with it a faint, distant echo, a horse's call, clear and proud, fading into the endless blue. Noah closed his eyes, a quiet smile breaking across his face. The fight was over, but something greater had begun. The wild still ran free, and for once so did he. The next morning rose clear, the first true calm Sage Bluff had seen since the storm. Sunlight spilled over the ridges, melting the frost from the grass. The air smelled clean, pine, smoke, and something that almost felt like peace. Down in the valley, the battlefield looked different in daylight. The churned mud had frozen in place, marked with hoofprints and tracks already fading under the thaw. The herd was gone, their passage smoothed by the wind, but the hollow still echoed faintly with their thunder. Lila stirred the fire back to life, her hair loose beneath her hat, eyes rimmed with exhaustion but calm. "You should eat," she said, handing him a cup of coffee black as coal. He took it, hands still raw from the fight. "Feels strange," he murmured. "Quiet, after all that." "Quiet doesn't mean safe," she reminded him. "Crowell's not the kind of man who forgets. He'll regroup." Noah nodded slowly. "Maybe, but he won't find the herd again." He looked toward the ridge where Grace had vanished, a faint smile returning. "She's too smart for that." They broke camp soon after, following the narrow path that wound down from the hollow toward the valley floor. By midday, the snow had melted into slick mud. The land below looked different, less cruel somehow. Here and there, fences had fallen under the storm, the earth reclaiming what man had built. When they reached town, people were already talking. The tale had moved faster than the wind. They passed the saloon first. Its doors swung open, and half a dozen men stood on the porch muttering. One of them, Tom Haskins, the blacksmith, stepped forward. "Briggs," he said, "word is you ran Crowell's men off up in the hills. That true?" Noah hesitated. "Depends who you ask." "Well, whoever's asking, you did what most of us been wishing for," Haskins said, a slow grin spreading under his beard. "Folks are done letting that man run us like mules." Lila glanced at Noah, her eyes softening. For the first time, he realized the whole town had been waiting for someone to stand up. At the sheriff's office, the door hung half open. Inside, Sheriff Kincaid sat at his desk, hat in his hands. He looked up when Noah entered, guilt sitting heavy behind his eyes. "I heard what happened," Kincaid said quietly. "Crowell's gone. Left town before sunrise. Packed up his men and wagons, headed east." Noah studied him for a moment. "And you?" The sheriff sighed. "I reckon I've been wearing the wrong badge too long. Folks here deserve better than a man who looks the other way." He reached into a drawer and pulled out a folded paper. "These are the deeds Crowell forged. Half the valley, including your old spread. He left 'em behind in his hurry. Figured they ought to go back where they belong." Noah took the papers, but said nothing. Kincaid nodded toward the window. "Town's changin', Briggs. Maybe this time it'll change right." By afternoon, they were back at Noah's Ridge. The old shack still leaned in the wind, but it looked different now, not just a shelter, but the beginning of something. They set to work patching the roof, repairing the fence, clearing the path to the barn. Lila found the tools where he'd left them years ago, rusted but not broken. As the sun dipped low, a familiar sound reached them from the hills, a distant whinny. Noah froze, turning toward the sound. There, cresting the ridge, stood Grace. Her coat gleamed in the light, scars faint but proud. Beside her, the foal trotted clumsily, its mane flickering gold. Lila's voice caught. "She came back." Noah walked forward slowly, heart pounding. Grace stopped a few yards away, watching him with calm, unblinking eyes. The foal stepped closer, curious. Noah reached out, his hand trembling, and Grace lowered her head, pressing her muzzle against his chest. He laughed softly, the sound breaking with emotion. "You found your way home." Lila joined him, smiling. "Looks like she brought company." The foal nudged at Noah's coat, Searching for the warmth of his hand, he scratched its neck gently. "Reckon we ought to build something better than that old shack." Lila grinned. "I was thinking the same thing." Over the next few days, they worked from dawn till dark. The townsfolk came to help. Haskins brought lumber, the Prices brought feed, and even the old trapper Juniper Bill showed up with nails and stories. They rebuilt the barn plank by plank, strong and wide enough to shelter more than just one horse. When it was finished, Lila stood back, hands on her hips. "Looks like a haven." Noah nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. "Ain't a bad name for it." She smiled. "Haven Trail. Has a ring to it." Word spread, as it always did in small towns. Before long, travelers and ranchers started sending their injured animals to the ridge. The blind, the lame, the abandoned. Noah and Lila took them all. And every evening, when the sun burned out behind the mountains, Grace and her foal would appear at the edge of the fence, as if counting each soul that had found shelter there. Months passed. The scars on the land softened, and so did the people. Sage Bluff began to look less like a town under one man's rule, and more like a place that remembered kindness. One evening, Noah stood on the porch, watching the light fade. The air was full of summer sounds now: crickets, the rustle of leaves, the distant laugh of children from the valley below. He felt Lila step beside him. "You ever think about what started it all?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "A storm, a horse half dead in the snow, and a fool who didn't know enough to walk away." "You think it was luck?" He shook his head. "No, I think it was grace." Down by the corral, Grace lifted her head as if she'd heard her name. The foal, no longer a foal but nearly grown, grazed beside her. The wind caught their manes, turning them into streaks of silver in the dying light. Noah leaned against the rail, his voice barely above a whisper. "People forget, Lila. Storms come, men fall, and they forget. But the wild—" He paused, smiling. "The wild remembers." Lila took his hand. "Then we'll remind them, as long as it takes." The last rays of sunlight slipped behind the mountains, setting the horizon on fire. The land glowed with a kind of holiness, earned, not given. Noah watched until darkness took it back. Somewhere beyond the ridge, a sound rose, the distant rhythm of hooves, hundreds of them, running free. It rolled through the night like a heartbeat, a promise kept. Noah closed his eyes and listened. The storm had come and gone, but its grace remained. And somewhere out there, in a world that still remembers the sound of hooves in the snow, stories like this keep riding on. One heart, one act of kindness at a time. If this tale touched something in you, drop a simple 0 or 1 in the comments. Let's see how many folks still believe that mercy can change a life. And if you want to ride with us again through the dust, the wind, and the stories of the frontier, make sure to subscribe and keep your saddle ready. There's another trail waiting just beyond the next sunrise.